Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. It is that time of year to do grad cards and that sort of a thing. So I decided to make some graduation cards themed using some brand new as well as some previous released and some like older HoneyBee products. One of the new ones is this Radiant stencil that I have had sitting on my desk since it arrived, a few weeks ago or whatever. And I couldn't decide, as usual. I couldn't make up my mind, what one card to make. So I decided to do three because I was also curious to see how this would look. So I have black cardstock, I have white cardstock, and I have some gold, like a polished gold mirror, like AKA gold foil cardstock. And I have the stencil, and then I have Nuvo Moonstone Glimmer paste, which is like one of my all-time favorites. So all I'm doing is I'm just rolling up little pieces of washi tape to stick to the back of these pieces of cardstock, and then just sticking them to my glass media mat, and then applying the paste over the stencil with just a metal palette knife. Doesn't really matter what kind you use, but just applying it in a nice thin even layer, lifting up the stencil, removing the piece of cardstock, and then just setting that aside to dry. With the foil one, I've shown this in other videos, you can definitely use glitter paste over foil. You just have to be a little more careful about like removing the stencil and applying that, because you're obviously applying to a very slick surface, but it works and it's fun. I was curious to see how the Moonstone would look because I've actually not done, this is the first time I've used the Moonstone Glimmer. I always use like the different color glitters, etc. So I was really happy with how this kind of turned out. So once I was done with the three, I immediately put the lid on the glimmer paste. I start cleaning things up. I wipe off my palette knife, etc. Because glitter paste is something you don't want to let dry onto your stencils or your tools or anything like that, because it's a pain in the butt to try and remove afterwards. So I wipe up my surface. I wash the stencil in the sink with just soap and water, and everything's good to go. So I set all those aside to dry. I used three different sentiment wafer die sets from HoneyBee. You could use one, but again, I have them all, and I couldn't make up my mind. I was like, why not do three? Because, I got them. So I have the YIPPEE Honey Cuts dies, the Hooray for You, and the Congrats. All three work well for graduation, but these also work. These were great for birthdays, for promotions. Like they're just, they're celebratory. So I die cut all of them from those same cardstock. So white, black, and that gold foil. And because with these wafer dies, HoneyBee has the word, then there's the outline, and then there's a second outline, the biggest one, which I cut from the white cardstock. That one actually has piercing detail all around the edge. I usually only use the word and the immediate outline, but adding that third one gives it that extra something. And that just gives it, that weight, that extra detail that just gives it, that finishing touch. So I die cut everything all at once, and then I'm assembling all these all at once. And I'm just using some liquid glue to adhere all of these layers together. And I've super sped this up in editing because it just gets boring sometimes watching me do the same thing over and over again. So I just add a little bit of glue. I adhere the words I die cut from the foil because that's what I really wanted to pop. And then I did the black outline and then the white outline with the piercing detail for the base of all of these. So after I had everything layered together, I'm going to work on some heat embossing. I pulled out the Congrats GRAD stamp set, because it's got a bunch of perfect sentiments. So I lined up the words I wanted, which said hats off to you. So I lined those up all together onto an acrylic block. And then I also have a grad cap stamp. This is from the Penny the Platypus stamp set that was released like last year or the year before. I've done other grad cards and videos using that. So I pulled that out because I thought that would just be perfect, especially with the hats off to you sentiment. So I grabbed more black cardstock, used my anti-static powder tool. I stamped the sentiment that I had arranged 3 times onto this background. And then the grad cap I'm going to stamp onto the remaining areas of this black cardstock. And I'm also going to stamp it multiple times on the other cardstock. So I end up with just a pile of these grad caps. So I got everything stamped. I'm going to coat it with some gold embossing powder. And I'm going to do that with the second piece off camera. So I end up with, I think, like a dozen grad caps that I had stamped and heat embossed. Coated everything with embossing powder, tap off the excess, and then I'm going to melt this with my heat tool, which is always my favorite part. I say this every time I show heat embossing, especially metallic embossing powders, because when they melt, there's just something so satisfying about that, and it's like, ooh, this is just so pretty. So melt all of these with my heat tool. Once everything is melted, I did a ton of die cutting with the coordinating die for the grad cap, and I also used the banner builder wafer dies for the sentiments. So I just cut everything apart with scissors and then just kept running everything through my die cut machine and die cut all of these, which was 1,000 times faster than fussy cutting anyway. So die cut everything with those coordinating dies, and then the sentiments, like I said, I used the banner builder wafer dies to die cut those, and then I'm just going to use my paper trimmer to trim off the ends because that's the fastest method. I've said this in other videos. I can't cut a straight line with scissors anymore. I used to be able to, but now no matter what I do, I swear it looks crooked to me. So this is where my little paper trimmer comes in so handy. So lined up all the sentiments. And then while I had my paper trimmer out, I also have all my backgrounds that have had time to completely dry. So these are dry now. And I'm going to trim all of these down, just kind of fiddling with the measurements and whatnot. I ended up trimming them down to roughly, it was like 5 inches by 3 3/4, something like that. All these trim fine. The one I can't even talk. You need to be careful with foiled backgrounds, my foiled background with the glitter paste on top of it when trimming. Because while it works, sometimes applying pressure, like if you try and die cut it or sometimes trimming, the pieces of the glitter paste can just kind of come off because, again, it's a slick surface. So I didn't have any problem with this, but I've noticed it with other stencil backgrounds that I've done over foil cardstock. You just have to be wary of that. So trimmed everything down. You can see that foil piece there, and it's literally like mirror reflective. So did that, and then I'm planning on using some of my Delicata Golden Glitz pigment ink. I highly, highly recommend with this one, or any pigment ink really, is to have a refill with it, because that's just the nature of pigment inks. They tend to use more than you expect. This had sat, I haven't used it for a few months, so I wanted to add some fresh ink to it. I use an old gift card. Anything will work really. I just have an old gift card that I literally keep it with my pigment ink pads, just to help work that ink into the ink pad, because again, it's pigment ink, it's very thick. It doesn't just like seep in, it's going to just sit there. So you got to kind of work it into the pad. So that's what I did. I just squeezed out some of the ink refill, worked it into the pad with the gift card, and stuck the gift card back in the drawer. So because this has just been obviously refilled, you want to use a very light touch when inking it, and I'll get to that in a second. So since I've got my ink pad ready, I also pulled out a black ink pad. I'm going to stamp sentiments onto the insides of all these cards. These sentiments are also from the Congrats GRAD stamp set. So I kind of figured out what sentiments I wanted, laid out the ones I'm going to use first, and I'm going to ink these ones up with VersaFine's Nocturne ink. So inked them up with that, and I'm using my stamp platform for this, so I can do all these, one after another. Don't have to worry about positioning anything because the sentiment's already in place. So I'm going to stamp the black part of the sentiment first, get all of these stamped. Once these are stamped, I can then clean off these stamps, remove them from the lid, and then I'm going to line up the other parts of the sentiment, which is the congratulations and the so proud of you stamp. So once I've got those lined up, these are the ones I'm going to stamp with this Golden Glitz Delicata ink. And I'm very lightly, like, you don't mush the ink pad into the stamps. You just tap it really, really lightly. Like, I was barely touching it to these stamps because that ink pad was just re-inked. So it's very, very juicy. So really light tapping, and same with when I press the lid down onto the card here. I'm not pressing really hard. I'm barely putting any pressure, and you get a perfect stamped impression. So hopefully all my random little tips help someone. So went along, stamped all of these sentiments all at once, and then let those dry as well. These, especially the Golden Glitz, one, it's a pigment ink, takes longer to dry, and two, I just re-inked it, so it takes longer than usual. I think I did blast all of these with my heat tool too, just to kind of speed up the drying process. And then I took some of these grad caps that I had heat embossed, and I'm going to adhere them to the inside of each card. I thought that would just kind of give it a final little something on the inside of the card. So I'm just using the liquid adhesive for that. I'm going to adhere all 3 of those grad caps to the inside of each card base. All my cards are heavyweight white cardstock, by the way. They're all A2, standard A2 size cards, so 5.5 by 4.25. So got those adhered, and then all of the panels that I'd stenciled on the beginning with the Radiant stencil, I put foam tape on the back of them, and then press those into place onto the card fronts. And then I'm going to add the sentiment as well with foam tape. In fact, everything basically at this point gets added with foam tape just to, you know, pop it out and give that dimension. So I did this whole combo with these, you know, with the black, the gold, the white, because this works for anyone and anything. But the nice thing with something like this is you could totally do it in the school colors, you know, depending on what the school colors are for your grad. That would look really fun too. You could still use some foil if there was like a red or a green or whatever. But the nice thing too about like gold, black, and white is it's just a great color combo. This also works really good for like weddings, for anything, honestly, like birthdays, retirement, weddings, anything. Like you can't go wrong with gold, black, and white. So got everything adhered those grad caps, kind of looking as if they've been tossed in the air, kind of just ties it all together. And that finished off my cards. So as always, there'll be a link below the video to my blog post. There will be a supply list with links to everything if you want to check that out. It's all in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!